And Tim, since this is your first time at Ebertfest, we have to tell you that's a casting of Roger's Thumb.
Oh, fantastic.
And it's, you know, it almost sounds cheesy, I keep saying it, but it's made by the same people who make the Academy Awards. And we will return this to you. We're going to take the thumb.
All right.
And you're going to be joined on stage by Nate Kohn is going to moderate, David Poland from MovieCityNews.com, and Michael Mirasol from the Philippines.
Pick a good spot? Okay.
Congratulations. I mean, you sold the place out. We were talking beforehand. I said to you, I thought you got academia right. This is, and this is very much an academic community, obviously.
The OED line has never got a better response.
You want to tell us about the epistemological underpinnings of this particular film? No.
Yeah, all right.
David?
Well, everybody expected this movie to be exactly what it was from the very beginning. No surprises, pretty much. It was kind of just a down-home fun movie. Where do you, I mean, this is true also of the gray zone for you, I think, where you go into this, in that case, you have the idea of the Holocaust, and Jews were in the camps of the Holocaust, and you kind of expect one thing, and then it becomes personal. Everything is just what is personal. And in this movie, everything you expect from a movie like this, as you start out, twin brothers, it's going to be fun, good old time with twin brothers, turns out to be something completely different. It's just, you forget almost that you're doing the twin gag by the middle of the movie.
Yeah, I mean, I have to give a lot of the credit for that to Edward and his so gorgeously effective rendering of each character. And in partnership with Edward, we really wanted to achieve a level of seamlessness, not only with our visual strategy, with having the characters cross in front and in back of one another and have moving camera and hands on one another, but also with the dialogue to have the characters finish one another's sentences and interrupt one another, and in a sense evolve the aesthetic of the Twins movie away from the 50-50 shot with the invisible seam down the middle, but do that, you know, in a more spiritual way as well. And a lot of the credit, I would have to say, goes to Edward's ability to juggle the calculus of that. In terms of the movies taking its twists and turns, which has delighted many audiences and created many proponents for the film, but has also, I'll be honest, divided another group away from the movie, thinking, you know, well, you ruined it for me because it veered off in this other direction.
You made me think, ooh.
Yeah. You know, hang on, isn't this supposed to be a comedy? But you know, we're doing our best in the movie to introduce the notion that that's going to happen quite early on. The movie opens with a monologue about how you get sideswiped in life. Then you have this scene in which the main character talks about the birth of tragedy and the Apollonian versus the Dionysian. You have a girl talk about, I like comedies, not tragedies. These are all, at least for a more sensitive audience member, little cues that the movie is going to take different directions and harken back to an older kind of storytelling. in which extremely dramatic things happen, and that turns might occur right out of a seemingly comic moment that are strikingly violent in a very punctuating way.
No pun intended.
Yeah. And that's what we were after. So, I guess you have to, I'm very proud of that.
Well, none of your movies as a director have been easy movies. They've all had, they've all had issues with distribution. They've all had issues. You've gotten movies that are still now cult movies. People watch your movies and live with them for a very long time, and you actually became famous around the same time as an actor as you did kind of break out as director. So you really never seem to have had that fear. It seems to be almost like you go back to make a movie when you really want to explore something deeper than just the acting.
Yes, I suppose I do, to a certain degree. This movie really evolved, and this will be great comfort for those who didn't like it. This movie evolved out of an enormous failure in my life, which was, I had another movie that I still hope to make called Seasons of Dust, and I was in pre-production on that movie in New Mexico with a crew, and the financing fell through, and nobody was paid, and we all went home, and it was a very difficult year for me. I'd been cast in No Country for Old Men, and had backed out of that movie to make my own movie. And then that movie fell through, and it was really, really difficult, both to say no to a role that Joel and Ethan had written with me in mind, and then to have the reason for turning that down fall apart. And I wanted to write a movie that had humor in it, frankly, to cheer myself up a little bit, about a guy who thinks he's doing everything right and is existing by the canard that if you obey the rules, everything's going to work out. And then that gets completely obliterated. And he grows from that experience and hopefully is going to proceed into the rest of his life in a more nuanced and rich way. And that was really the seed for writing this Bill's story. Bill is really the protagonist, the professor, I think, in Leaves of Grass. And so I guess I would say that, yeah, experiences in life in strange ways do inform the movies as they've come about. This one's very different from Gray Zone, though, because I think Gray Zone pretty much sets you up initially for what sort of movie it's going to be, and then never, I mean, I hope it's I'm very proud of that movie, but it has an intended coherence to it. Mm-hmm. And this has, in a sense, an intended incoherence.
Interesting.
Whenever I think about this movie, this is the second time I watched this movie, I think a lot about duality, and there's a certain dichotomy here, because I remember watching with my wife on DVD, and I had paused it around just before when Richard Dreyfuss' character gets murdered, and I was telling my wife, oh, this is a really hilarious comedy, so we have to watch it. So we watched it again from the start, and then she gets to that part, she noticed that scene, and then, he gets brutally murdered, and he said, I thought you said this was funny, So the duality, it's like the first half of the film, it's hilarious, and then you get to that almost midpoint, and then a lot of main characters' fates start to plummet. It's comedy and tragedy. Then you have certain philosophies in the film where Bill Kincaid follows a very rigorous intellectual process, and then he meets his polar opposite, who's free-going and recognizes truth and beauty in a not-so-formal way. And I'm sorry if I'm reading too much into this. There's a moment when they mention Heidegger, and in the broad strokes of his life, he was also noted for intellectual rigor. He rose to the heights of the philosophical world, and then he crashed because he was supporting the Nazis. So I was wondering, it seemed too much of a coincidence. I was wondering what you were thinking when it seemed, you say there's an incoherence, but I see a really strong pattern of duality. I could always thought of number two.
Yeah, that's intended, but also it's an intentional incoherence, and I think, I think sometimes it's interesting to look at narrative, and I watch movies this way, whether they're incredibly formal, like a Coen Brothers movie or a Spielberg movie, or they're more painterly and abstract, like a Terrence Malick film. I do tend to look at films because they are an art form. In the visual, well, in the language, the artistic language of abstract art, so that simple rules that are obviously meant to be broken, and some great paintings, they are broken, but that in an abstract painting, a color is always echoed elsewhere. And that sometimes if you take the aesthetics of balance in abstract art and how composition occurs in something that is not figurative, and apply it to narrative, which is inherently figurative because you're following a clear storyline, and you're also literally watching people interact with one another, and they are figures. But if you also apply the notions of abstract art, that can make your structure a lot more complex in very interesting ways. And so you can choose a figure like Heidegger as an area of focus for a guy like Bill, who has a twin brother, and you throw that color in, which is of course echoed elsewhere. And this is not just intellectual gamesmanship, it should work in making the piece work as a whole. He also translates Plautus, and in particular he translates the Menechmi that's published by Oxford University Press, and that's that Harvard lunch scene. And the Menechmi is about identical twins. It's a whole twins game play, and this movie is in that tradition. And that stuff is all over the movie. And again, it's not just gamesmanship, it's the repetition of color and form from the point of view of an abstract art aesthetic. And I think that's part of what you do as a director in making your movie compelling and, frankly, hopefully delightful to see.
And how does Walt Whitman fit into that equation?
Well, Whitman is one of our greatest poets, but more importantly, Whitman is a wonderful lesson for Bill, in that he, as Kerry Russell's character points out to him, Janet points out to him, in that he created a meter for each poem that was particular to that poem. And that's what free verse is. And if you study Whitman's poetry, and if you study really good free verse, it is metered. It's just not metered in a formalized way. The meter is particularized to the work itself. And I think hopefully what Bill learns in the movie is what Whitman teaches us in the way that he uses rhythm in his poetry. And that is that each individual life must meter itself. And that in doing so, you find structure. Your life isn't without structure. Whitman's poems aren't without meter, they're just without strict, pre-prescribed meter. At the beginning of the movie, Bill is living like a villanelle or a sonnet. At the end of the movie, he's living his life in free verse.
So can you bring this kind of rigor to your work as an actor? Or is it something that you reserve while you're writing and directing? I mean, is the opportunity to bring this kind of intellectualism to?
I think you do. You must bring that to your work. And sometimes it screws you up. You know, I just did this, spent half a season on a television show, which I think is not going to go on anymore, playing this character who was this is true, a human weapon. And I, you know, needed to pay off some debts back home from making independent movies. And I also wanted the challenge of working on a character over a longer period of time and maintaining it. And this character fought in most of the episodes. And so I took this very seriously and did an enormous amount of fight training and really developed what I thought while working on it was an incredibly rigorous, tight approach to this character. Now, having watched it, the early episodes, it was kind of too tight. I was almost too rigorous and lost the fun that's necessary in the vernacular of television and the language of television in something that's supposed to be a bit funny. And so, yes, I do, and I would say sometimes I do that to a fault.
Is that the hand of the director? I mean, in television, you're working with a lot of different directors.
There's
as
that
a
director
role,
in television
right.
is an oxymoron.
Yeah. So if you had a strong director, they would help you not do that, I guess, on a picture?
Yeah, I mean, in television, it's not really about, it's more of a writer's medium. But the writers are and the showrunner is so busy writing the next script, particularly in network television, that they aren't really present enough. They deputize people, and if those people who are deputized are not an effective enough representation of what it is the showrunner wants, the whole thing is just rudderless. What's great about movies and why I prefer them, and will now be very wary of doing any more television, is that you do have this strong, rigorous, authorial presence on the set who's embracing your rigor, but also helping you shape how it's used. And, you know, you're a color to them in the ideal situation. So, yeah. I guess I do apply that rigor, and sometimes I've learned to a fault.
Back to this particular movie, what happened to all that weed?
I'd like to know who made the research for that part.
You know, this is funny. You always beg, borrow, and steal to make these movies, and if you guys are all followers of Roger, I know the sorts of movies he brings to you guys here. So I'm sure every director sits up here and talks about how you beg, borrow, and steal, and their labors of love, et cetera, et cetera. So I'll try to make my version of that interesting, which is that we said, well, how the hell, you know, on our budget are we going to make this grow house? Because it's got to be the Taj Mahal. It's got to be breathtaking. It's got to be an unprecedented, at least in indie film. The one in Pineapple Express was pretty good, but at least in an indie film, it's got to vie with anything anybody's ever seen. It's got to eclipse that. It's got to be just breathtaking. So we had two great strokes of luck. One was that Edward's girlfriend was a producer on Pineapple Express. So we got a lot of their plants that the studio had, you know, given them money to build. But I got to tell you, we were so meticulous, and I was so excited to make everything look absolutely real that in vetting the Pineapple Express plants, I didn't think they were good enough. So then we found this company that really wants to be the go-to company for hydroponic pot growers. under the guise of being the go-to company for hydroponic vegetable growers. So we told them what we were up to, and they gave us $100,000 worth of equipment.
That's real equipment.
And that's what you see up there. All those tanks, everything. And then the spiral system I found on a website with my production designer, and we made that up, and we're very proud of that, the NFT system. And hopefully now there are growers out there using that. And we've pushed the art forward, which is, if it weren't for that damn erosion of brain cells, marijuana is just the greatest. All right.
Apparently, apparently, a number of the filmmakers have actually taken the golden thumb and made it into a bong. It's not very well known, but Michael.
I'd like to think that the film is very personal to you because there are several aspects that it's an amalgam of things in your life. I mean, you're Jewish. You've done studies in classics. You grew up in Tulsa, Oklahoma. So I was wondering how dear it is to you and how much of that film is part of you.
Well, it's an age-old saying that, the more you particularize, the more universal what it is you're getting at is going to become, and the more you universalize, the smaller your work is going to seem. And you combine that with another cliche that you write about what you know. And I think that's what led me to a lot of what happens in this movie. It's obviously incredibly fanciful. You do really have to suspend your disbelief to a degree, and I guess that's really the beating heart of the movie in a personal way to me, because it brings me back, or it brought me back while I was writing it, to the delight of watching plays and movies as a kid that had a playfulness to them that winked at you and said, look, this is obviously implausible, but you'll find in this, if you suspend your disbelief, a kind of rehearsal for life. You're going to watch these extreme, essential, fanciful versions of stuff that is really actually quite important to you. It's just exaggerated in a way that's a lot of fun. And I think that's what the experience for me, even though I couldn't articulate it at the time, was in going to see movies when I was 10, 11, 12 years old.
Examples of things that stuck with you, movies?
Well, I was just talking backstage about it. The first movie that really, really stuck with me, and I saw it when I was 9, was this movie Silent Running. And it's not a funny movie, and so in a sense it really has nothing to do with this movie. But it has everything to do with this movie to me, because that movie is so outrageous. It's so extreme. It's so wonderfully ambitious, and so healthily polemical. It's making its point in a very clear and literary way, with such simple, the production design of the movie, the performance of Bruce Dern, even when the movie is clumsy, and the weird Joan Baez montages. There's such delight in the storytelling as it's making its argument. And this movie, in a far less important way, because that was a seminal movie about environmentalism, is is also making a point. You know, that the last scene is a very clear. It's meant to be, you know, intentionally, because the film begins in a classroom. It's meant to be something you could. It's overtly something you could talk about in a classroom. Bill's life, you know, is the weather is a metaphor for his life, and he learned about the weather, but storms still happened. And I delight in that kind of scene. And so I guess Silent Running would be an example, even though it's a completely different movie.
Let's open it up to some questions from our audience.
We need a mic, though.
We have mics in the audience, so just raise your hand and a microphone will come to you.
Does it work?
Yeah.
Congratulations, the film was great.
Thank you.
Oddly enough, I kept thinking, people are going to disagree with me on this, I kept thinking of Fargo. Because both films are about guys who enter in, normal guys who enter into the criminal world and don't really understand that it's unpredictable, and it's messy, and it's bloody. And what I want to know from you is, what did you take from your experience with the Coen brothers?
First of all, Fargo is an extraordinary achievement, and to have Leaves of Grass, which I would kind of call a messy version of Fargo. And Leaves of Grass is, Leaves of Grass, again, and I will say this, is intentionally messy and shambling in a certain way. Even in our production design, once you get to Oklahoma, if you watch the movie again, you'll notice there are plants growing on the edges of frame, and whereas the shots in academia are very composed and balanced, and the camera is generally quite still, or it moves in very deliberate ways. In Oklahoma, there's less formal composition. The editing is looser. We actually even used a different set of lenses for the Oklahoma section of the movie. The color palette is different, and it's messier down there. But the one moment in Fargo that I really did want to achieve, and I think the Coen brothers did it better, is the turn that takes place from a moment of violence. And in Fargo, it's when they kill that police officer, when Peter Stormare shoots him in the head, and right over Steve Buscemi, and then everything changes after that. So that was an influential moment. I guess, you know, the Coen brothers, particularly during prep, are as rigorous as it gets. And that's mostly what I take from them. Every director with whom I work, and acting has been film school for me because I never studied directing. So just being on all these sets has been film school for me. Every director has offered something different, and often what one director will offer will diverge completely, almost diametrically in opposition to the director often that I worked with right before. And a great example is that I did, essentially there was one movie in between, but I worked with Terrence Malick and Joel and Ethan pretty much back to back within 2 years of each other. I made this movie called O in between, but really my acting experiences were Terrence Malick and then Joel and Ethan. They couldn't approach filmmaking in more different ways. Terry, at the beginning of each day, doesn't know what he's going to do. And at the end of the day, he doesn't really know what he's going to do necessarily with the footage, and he doesn't even watch his dailies. The movie is really made editorially. He shoots an incredible amount of film, and then the movie really has its final shaping when he writes the voiceover. And he'll often eviscerate a film of its main character and create a pastiche where what you read on the page was actually something very cleanly and traditionally narrative. Joel and Ethan don't change a word from their script. It's exactly what you've read, and not only do they know what they're doing within each hour of the day, and it goes that way. They never go over schedule. They never go over budget. Everything has been planned, and that's all they shoot. But they actually provide the actors with storyboards. So when you get there in the morning, you're told exactly what you're going to shoot. And they're the only filmmakers I've ever worked with, and I think I've done, at this point, over 40 movies as an actor. And they're the only filmmakers I've ever experienced who give you storyboards in the morning. Now, do they make better movies than Terry? Does Terry make better movies than they do? No. So I've learned from every director with whom I've ever worked, and that's not just a sop.
So what would your actors say about you? Or what would you want them to say about you in terms of that kind of broad stroke?
What I'm trying to achieve right now as a director is I go, boy, that's tough. I think each movie has been different. I guess I would like, because I come at it from an actor's perspective, when I was listening to actors talk about me, I would want them to say, when I gave my best performance, the camera was pointed at me. And I think that's your number one responsibility as a director. And what I've experienced mostly when I'm listing how directors didn't quite get there when I've been on their sets, the camera has been pointed away from certain actors when they were doing their best work. And it's really hard to know when to aim the camera at an actor when they're not delivering something off camera that, when the performance is happening, and how to maintain that in a day and balance it against, somebody else might be having a performance that's extraordinary at the same time, but the camera's pointed elsewhere. It sounds really simple and silly, but it's actually as big as it gets, that one issue. And that's just from an acting point of view. What's exciting about directing is that's just part of your day, dealing with the actors. There's composition of shots, thinking ahead to the editing, but actors, that's where I would say.
Let's take another question from the audience.
From the balcony.
Okay.
Well done. I have two questions. When you conceived of the movie, did you think about the movie Deliverance? And number two, how was your movie received in Oklahoma?
It's been received really, really well in Oklahoma, although, yeah, it's actually has been received really well in Oklahoma, which was incredibly gratifying. There's a wonderful art house in Tulsa called Circle Cinema, and it played there for, I think, 6 weeks, which was great. And then it played in Broken Bow in Oklahoma City, and I have to say that one of the reasons this movie had a theatrical life is because of Roger, who saw it in Toronto and really championed it. And so he's one of the reasons it got to a place like Oklahoma, even though that's where I'm from, with a real theatrical release instead of me just screening it there. Yeah, I guess Deliverance in some respect was on my mind, but not, more obliquely or subconsciously. I love that movie, and I love the book. And, Dickie is obviously a wonderful poet as well. So, yeah, obliquely, Deliverance.
I think we have time for one more question.
She's been really swinging her arm
Right
up
here?
Thank you. I'm Professor Donna Cox, and I was born and raised in Enid, Oklahoma.
Oh, all right.
And my brother is a crossbow expert.
So you'll tell them that I'm not lying about that.
Needless to say, I love the movie, and I was wondering just how much of it you actually shot in Oklahoma. It looked like it was awfully green. Did you choose the right time of year? But it just seemed very green. I was wondering if all the Okie shots were filmed there.
Well, they do call where I grow up green country. Do you know that section of Oklahoma is called? Yeah, that Tulsa's in green country. No, we shot it all in Louisiana, right by the Oklahoma border. So we were about an hour from Idabel. So we were essentially right there, right quite near the Idabel, Broken Bow, Little Dixie area. All that stuff is quite real, and we were meticulous about making sure we chose locations in northern Louisiana that really mimicked Little Dixie. So I hope you'll get your brother to see the movie.
Listen, thank you so much for doing this. And thank you for, coming on such short notice.
You bet. Thank you.